we have been collaborating with the CIBSE FM Group for 15 years. In fact, we just worked out the other day this would be our 15th joint seminar with the CIBSE FM Group. But we're very happy, especially to be collaborating with the Building and Engineering Services Association and the Building Controls Industry Association. And their president is going to be our first speaker tonight, and that's Steve Harrison. And Steve, I'd like you to come forward. Steve is actually here with us in person, so he'll be speaking from London. Our second presenter will be speaking online, but over to you, Steve. Steve Harrison.
Thank you very much. Collaboration is a good word, and I'm going to talk to you about how legislation is helping collaboration and also how technology is doing that as well. But first, I'd like to make some introductions. So, if this works properly. My name's Steve Harrison. I work for Belimo. I'm within Global Product Management. However, my role here today is to speak to you as President of the Building Controls Industry Association, or the BCIA as we like to call it. It's a membership-driven organisation. It has no direct employees, and we volunteer to promote the goodness of controls within the industry. The membership itself is made up from the leading controls manufacturers, the leading controls installers, integrators, and distributors. But in the flavour of collaboration, as you can see from the screen, you will find that there are one or two non-controls companies there, and this really is an indication of how the industry is changing. We see Trane, Daikin, Mitsubishi, ABB, all interested in controls, and this is how we see things moving together, with controls being a key part in improving that collaboration. We like to think we're the voice of the controls industry, and our main message is that we can save money for the end user. I feel it's our role really to ensure that the end users understand their controls in the first place. So it's very close to our heart with regards to education and training to bring people on and to get the best out of their controls. Our motto is monitor, adjust, manage, and then do the same thing again. That's like the circle of life for us controls guys. And you'll see that as a bit of a theme throughout the presentation. Another key part of the BCIA is raising standards. We have launched our Building Controls Professional Assessment. This is an end-of-course assessment developed by the BCIA. It's a 2.5-day test. It's difficult. We made it difficult on purpose, and it's open to apprentices and also the more mature person that's within the controls industry who would like to take on the qualification. It's the equivalent to the AM2 test. It's closely related to that and in exactly the same way, so it's a natural progression for an electrician to get into controls. We feel it gives some reassurance to end users that once a controls engineer has been through this test and achieved his ECS Gold card as a controls engineer, the quality of his installation will be to a set standard agreed by the BCIA. So, some facts about buildings. You know, if you look at the life cycle of a building, the actual operating cost of a building is 4 times greater than the capital cost to design, to build it, and at the end of the life to take it down. And this is the part that we in the controls industry need to influence at the design stage. It's a complicated slide. Don't get too much involved in what's on the screen, but my message from this slide is if you get this bit right, the design and the build, the build will get right, and we can influence the 80% or the operating part of the building. How do we do that? Well, there's something called demand-based management. It's not new. It's quite extensively used in the US. It just means that instead of controlling a building on a time schedule or a holiday schedule, you react the main plant to the actual loading of the building or any heat gains generated by people, occupancy, machinery, solar gain, whatever. But from this comes a lot of data. And data is no good unless you do something with that data. And the controls industry have been really at the forefront in taking up the Internet of Things. And this is another reason why collaboration is important to us. There's now IT conversion with the controls sector. Controls engineers are now almost IT engineers. They're IP addressable, are aware of our IP systems, they're aware of the technology. And indeed, controls companies are creating products with IP addresses in them. So, sensors in buildings, on people, in your cars, the data is collected, it's stored in the cloud. Historically, we've stored it locally on a PC. We can now store it in a server far off, and we can access that data once it's been normalized and aggregated by many different sources. So, for example, a controls company could launch its data into the cloud and make it accessible to a commissioning company. Further collaboration. So that's the Internet of Things. Just as a point there, it's estimated that sensor data will exceed social media by factors of between 10 to 20 times in 5 years. So, the nitty-gritty stuff, the legislation stuff. I just wanted to talk to you really about EN 15232. It's like the holy grail of the controls industry. It's something that we've waited for a long time. It's something that is independent, and it is something that's now a European standard. But it is a means of calculating the efficiency of your building. Okay. It's now in the compliance guide to Part L, and my predecessor, the president of the BCIA, Ian Ellis, worked endlessly to get it in to the compliance guide. It's my job as the current president to get it into the guide. How does it work? Okay, it's an EPC at the end of the day, and a high-end BACS would get you an A-class building, and a low-end BACS would give you a C, and a non-efficient BACS or building automation control system would get you an AP. And EN 15232 is referenced at a level C, or a hinge point, for all buildings. So let me just tell you how that works. Buildings are weighted in different categories and sizes and types and usage, and this has been calculated by CENTC 247. And then from the norm, or the medium, of a C-class building, they've weighted a scoring system, either higher or lower, to give you an indication on how efficient that building is, depending on the building type. Another footnote for you is the BCIA have been working with BRE to get EN 15232 into BREEAM. So, what does it all mean in real terms? Take this simple graph on the screen here. If this is our energy consumption on the left, this is time along the bottom. With X, let's call it 100%. If you put the standard in, which EN 15232 calls for, it is inevitable that your energy bills will rise due to inflation, due to crises in the Middle East, due to building change, or due to the building just simply getting out of control. If we can get in at the design stage, like I mentioned at my earlier slide, and install an advanced integrated building automation control system, our starting point is that much lower, but still energy prices will rise. It's a fact. So what we suggest is a functional assessment, a check, to make sure the equipment is running correctly, to make sure the building hasn't changed, to make sure the loading is the same on the building and the plant is up to the design criteria. If we carry out this functional check, we create a sawtooth, and a recommission, we create a sawtooth in our energy bill or energy usage. And this is really what we want to achieve: recommission, recommission, and recommission. I would just like to point out that the intelligence is still in front of the monitor. No matter what legislation can do, no matter what help you can gather, the decision is still made by the person in front of the monitor. I know it's difficult to keep up with legislation and new rules and laws, but there is help out there. The BCIA can help you with that. And also another association called UBAC. UBAC is a European Controls Association and have an accreditation scheme for product and systems. Again, a membership organization, but primarily of controls manufacturers, not installers. So they're more interested in the product development and the product integration. They have a product certification scheme, which means they take a product, or a manufacturer can put forward a product, and UBAC will test it to make sure that it meets all European and local standards, and give it back with a certificate or a stamp on it, so the customer knows they're buying an energy efficient product. I had a big problem with this because it meant you had to deliver your controller pre-configured, engineered to UBAC. They would test it in a lab and they would send it back for you to you. That's great for a fan coil controller or a boiler controller or a fixed application controller. The gap that I saw was the configurable controller and the quality of the configuration by the configuring engineer. So 3 years ago, UBAC Systems was launched. And this is, in particular, site-based. So you have 2 certification schemes now. You can have a product, which you can send off to a lab with a fixed application. Now they have a system of enforcing EN 15232 or assessing EN 15232 on your site with your system. I'm much more comfortable with that because it gives you an holistic view of the performance of the building, whereas small snippets of fixed application controllers didn't. So I'm going to tell you about UBAC. It's structured, it's standardized, and it's a scientifically proven tool for assessing energy efficiency in buildings. It takes the energy performance of building directive and builds from that. Go here at the back. Okay. It takes the EPDP and builds from that. It has it uses EN 15232, which is a standardization which I've just spoken about. And because it's built on legislation, it is permitted to issue an energy performance certificate at the end of the assessment. So, how does it work? EN 15232 on the left here is a very generic legislation, or standard rather, built around buildings in general, and UBAC have taken that as a standard or as a base and created one, or a tool or an assessment tool that they can apply to your individual building. So this means they can take a look at your heating system, your cooling system, can make sure that both are working together and not against each other, make some preliminary, very high-level tests, add a weighting or a number to that, top the numbers up, and come out with a rating on the EPC. Just out of interest, a 10% improvement on last year or on your recommission gives you about a 5% energy save. So it's a means or a method of enforcing EN 15232. How is that executed? Well, an assessor will come to site, take a look at your design, take a look at your drawings, take a look at your floor plans, understand the building's use, make sure he's comfortable with the layout and its function. He will then make an inspection around your plan to make sure things are communicating together, put it into his assessment tool. The tool is then sent off to Brussels, and he will register the building as a UBAC assessed building. An independent UBAC team will then look to make sure that the assessment has been carried out in accordance with EN 15232, and only once they're happy with that, they will make the final declaration and issue the certificate. Okay? But it doesn't stop there. You know, I've honed in on the design and how we should get things right, but in actual fact, over the building life, you might want to do this every year during a maintenance regime. You might want to recommission as the building changes. You might want to re-let the building as a different function. It's always a good time to get in UBAC to make sure that you are conforming to the standard EN 15232. So it's an ongoing process. And back to the circle of life of controls, adjust, manage, and monitor is our motto. So, who are the stakeholders in UBAC and EN 15232? Well, naturally, the building owners will be concerned about their operational expenditure, so they would clearly have an interest in reducing that. Additionally, a building custodian or somebody responsible for a suite of buildings that might be invested in selling them out or letting them would get a better rentable value for a building that has a certificate behind it. So we're finding a lot of interest from estate holders with regards to approving their buildings as energy efficiency to allow them to ask a greater rentable value. CIBSE, I think, would be interesting for consultants. It's an independent benchmark of the performance of a building. And I particularly like this because as a controls engineer, we're normally at the end of the food chain. When the costs start getting cut, they normally end up taking the odd sensor out, and the consultant is in a situation where he has to make savings and he has to make sacrifices. And I believe with EN 15232, it gives the consultant or designer an argument to go back to the client and say, well, in actual fact, if you really want to take the sensors out, you will no longer get an A+ building, you will get an A building. It's your decision. So from a controls point of view and a consultancy point of view, I think it's a great independent tool to enforce onto buildings. And then finally, there's the assessors themselves, the guys who are out there doing the maintenance and installation. They can become assessors and use this assessment as a bolt-on to an existing maintenance contract, A, to give greener buildings, or B, to increase revenue and extend their portfolio of offering. How many buildings have done? Well, these figures are a little bit out of date now. I haven't got the latest ones from UBAC, but about 260,000 square meters of buildings have been done across Europe within offices, hospitals, education, wholesale, and hotel, which is quite an increase on the year before. Who's doing it? Well, right now, the BCIA are collaborating with UBAC to promote EN 15232. In other regions, it's other associations that are similar. There's about 129 trained people or UBAC assessors out there. And finally, my last slide, if you need any further information on UBAC or on the BCIA, we have a website. There's my card if you want to come and speak to me later. But that's all for me. Bang on time.
Bang on time. Yeah, impressive.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Steve, very much. It was bang on time, actually. That's great. And what we're going to do is, Steve sat down now. We're going to have our next presentation, and then we'll take questions at the end. But one thing I'd like to say, in the spirit of collaboration, that the BCIA and the CIBSE FM group will be signing a memorandum of understanding at the end of this meeting. That's correct, isn't it, Karen? So that's something we won't be sharing with you out there on the web because you wouldn't be able to see what was going on. But we'll be having a party here and we'll be thinking of you. So, but anyway, let's straight on to our next presenter. I just need to press a button. And this is the next main partner in our event tonight. This is BADS, the Building and Engineering Services Association. We're very lucky to have Mike Malina, who some of you will have heard speak before. He's a very knowledgeable chap. He'll have been very interested to hear all that talk about commissioning, because when I first knew Mike, he was very heavily involved in commissioning. But as you can see from his little plug there, he's also a published author. And he's now is a regional manager for the Building and Engineering Services Association. So, Mike, over to you. Are you with us?
Hi, thanks, Ewan. Hello, everybody. Really pleased to be doing this webinar, especially now that I can see so many people from literally around the world have joined us. There seems to be people represented from every continent, which makes it really exciting in terms of the fact that we're talking about sustainability and looking at sustainable building services engineering, and it sort of gives it that gravitas that we're all talking that international language of building services engineering, and it's a common theme that we need to talk about.
Mike, could I just cut in there?
Yeah.
I meant to mention, as you mentioned all those people, if people out there on the web would like to ask questions, there is a text box. I'm not sure if you're getting this out there by text from Tim, but there's a text box where you can put your questions in, and we'll pick up all the questions at the end. So, sorry about that, Mike. Carry on.
Okay, no problem. What I decided to do was, rather than do a sort of heavy technical presentation, I'm going to take us back a step and talk about the importance of maintenance, because I believe that our industry misses a trick. We tend to be quite inward-looking, with the greatest respect to all my fellow engineers. We need to be a lot more with it in terms of how we communicate and how we deliver our message. So pretty much the title of this, and it very much reflects chapter 12 of my book, shameless plug, I know, but keeping it all going, the importance of maintenance for sustainability, and you'll see why it's so important, how it actually registers in what we're talking about. Right, Steve mentioned the collaboration between BNES and the BCIA, the Building and Engineering Services Association, and the Building Controls Industry Association. There was a conference that was held in 2014, the Building Services Summit, and that very much concentrated on something called the 10-80-10 principle, which I think was an excellent sort of way of concentrating minds to realize, and something we should be concentrating on a lot more. When you actually look at the total budget for a building over its lifetime, it's fair enough to say, and Steve did mention this, that 10% of the lifetime cost is actually made in the actual construction phase. But what people forget, which is probably the most important part, and something that we need to get across to the finance directors, the bean counters, the people that make important decisions as we operate our buildings, is that 80% is spent on operating the building in terms of its functionality, its energy use, its maintenance process, and the whole range of things that we're familiar with. And then ultimately the other 10% could be spent on the dismantling or the demolition of a building, hoping that a lot of it is recycled. So if you actually look at that entirety, you could actually say that 90% of a building's costs are entirely influenced by its design, construction, and operation. So the key message there is we've got to get it right from the start. Now, we don't have the luxury all the time of doing new build, but certainly we could have quite an influence on how we look at retrofit buildings, for example, which is going to be the bulk of what we do. So we need to look at that for instance. Now, maintenance should not just be an add-on, it's fundamental, absolutely fundamental. Now, something I've written about quite a bit and started to think on a wider basis of how we communicate this, because one of the things I've had the privilege of doing over the last 30 years associated with the industry in one form or another is I've delivered an awful lot of training. And I was trying to calculate it out, but in that 30 years, I think I've trained something like 1,250 engineers and facilities managers, which is quite a lot of people. And it's been a fantastic opportunity to getting feedback, because that's one thing I love about this industry, is you never stop learning. And the common theme that I've found all the way through is that we are missing some fundamentals, and the way we need to explain, the importance of getting things right from the start. Now, when you look at maintenance, we sometimes think of maintenance as a human-made activity, but I'm someone who sort of all those years ago, 30 odd plus years ago, became an environmentalist who became an engineer, and simultaneously an engineer who became an environmentalist. So I feel like I understand natural processes quite well, the natural world, and if we actually look around us, we can see that maintenance is an integral part of nature's systems. If you think about it, all of nature's processes are based around maintaining all of its systems. Now, if you think also, our bodies repairs themselves. I mean, if you think if we cut ourselves, the healing process begins almost immediately. And we've got a lot of similarities with the medical profession. Now, the reason it's uppermost in my mind is I've had some keyhole surgery recently on my knee to remove a bit of bone that was buried in the meniscus of cartilage, which was causing me a lot of pain. So I got a fair bit of thinking about this to sort of focus on this. And there's an incredible amount of similarities between us as engineers and the medical profession. If you think about it, doctors and engineers use very similar tools, diagnostic tools and equipment. We use thermography, we use ultrasound, we use stethoscopes, quite a few of these sort of common themes. Even endoscopes to look inside building plant and services, as well as looking inside bodies, I guess, from the medical point of view. So in the modern world, we have come to understand in very much the importance of sort of maintaining ourselves and our own fitness, which is obviously really important, and our health. And yet, fundamentally, I think that people don't seem to make the same connection with understanding the importance of maintaining both the natural and the built environment. And that's something I believe that an industry we should be concentrating a lot more on. So we have to be much more than building services engineers. Buildings involve plant and services, yeah, for sure, that's something that's our bread and butter. But something I've learned over the years is we've got to look at people. How do people interact with the systems in their buildings, and why do they behave so irrationally sometimes? So I almost feel like we've got to be multi-skilled in a sense. We have to be smarter. And you could look at this in various aspects. You could say we have to be psychologists. We have to analyze why people behave so irrationally sometimes when it comes to using energy and maintaining their buildings. Why do they open the windows instead of turning the heating down? Or why do they continually press buttons, because they've never been shown, to raise the temperature? And what they don't realize is that they're raising the set point, for example, and they're throwing the whole system out, whether this is at home or whether this is in the workplace. And I think a lot of this is down to education. So fundamentally, I think we need to be educators. We need to make awareness to how people control and operate their buildings. We need to be communicators. We need to make the message relevant. You know, a lot of people would almost say in human nature is, what's in it for me? Why should I be interested in saving energy? Why should I be interested in making sure my building is operating correctly? And you could say, well, the fundamental part of that is if you're working for a company and the company is spending a fortune on energy because it's a very wasteful building, then that's going to affect the bottom line of the company's profit and therefore could have a knock-on effect to your job. You could put it in those type of terms, but I think we have to use every means possible to try and make sure that people understand exactly how it's relevant to them. And finally, I think really important, I've learned this over the years, is we have to be diplomats. because one of the things we're doing all the time is competing with competing priorities, coping with competing priorities. We need to get hold of certain people that run organizations that we don't normally come into contact with. And one of those key people would be the finance director, because they're making decisions on a whim, especially for regards what I've seen in some facilities management situations where they've got 100% budget for 1 year and they decided to cut it in half without any real thought about how that's going to affect their processes in the building itself. So that's a sort of fundamental message. The other thing is I use visuals a lot in my training because I'm a great believer in a picture says 1,000 words. And one of the things I've identified over the years is people don't really think about how they use their energy and how wasteful we as a society are. And this applies throughout Europe, throughout the world basically. Everywhere I've ever been, I have the privilege of actually training or gone to do work on commissioning or any of the sort of work I've done. I see a common theme, and that is basically people not taking energy seriously enough and not understanding it. So what in effect we have in many countries is a policy of sticking plaster on a leaking energy bucket. I mean, this picture, for example, shows an energy bucket. So all the energy is being poured into this bucket, which is coming from a power station, for example, and then it is literally letting it leak all over the place. And you could represent that by any form of currency symbol, but in this case, pound notes. Another way of visualizing that is here I have a load of £10 being thrown out the window. In effect, that's what people are doing. You could cut the middle person out, and instead of wasting your energy, you might as well throw the money out the window, because that's what it comes down to. So we need to find ways of trying to get this message across. Now, if I was only allowed to show you one slide today, this would be it. This is everything I've ever done, and my whole philosophy is based on what I call the energy hierarchy, what actually delivers an energy efficient building. And I think we should follow this practice, and if we followed this practice to the letter, we would deliver much more efficient buildings, and we would certainly close the performance gap, which is what we've been talking about in this seminar. Most important thing we've got to start with every single time is reducing the need for energy in the building's design in the first place. Now, whether that's new build or whether that's retrofit, that's got to be the priority. The second thing, almost as equal, but certainly important, is to use our energy and our indoor climate more efficiently. So fundamental to this is controls, without a doubt. Using a building energy management system, a BEMS, a building control system is absolutely fundamental. And to see what Steve was saying about the advance of EN 15232, can't possibly commend this more. Something that I'm really pleased to see has after all that hard work, is now sort of paying dividends. And the idea of getting it into BREEAM and to get it into other standards is really fantastic news. So certainly very, very pleased to see that. And the third thing, after and only after we've done steps 1 and 2, is to look at supplying energy from low carbon and renewable sources where appropriate. And I emphasize the where appropriate because what we're seeing is a lot of people starting with number 3 because they haven't realized that from a cost effective and from an environmental and sustainability point of view, the dividends and the return on investment is far superior by miles on steps 1 and 2. And last but not least, irrespective of how the market is rigged internationally and the fact that oil prices, yes, oil prices have come down, but that's only a temporary blip because we're going to run out of this stuff and there's going to be crisis and there's going to be problems, and you can see that coming ahead no matter what. And we've got to get away from this short-termism view. We've got to use our fossil fuels more efficiently as we phase them out towards what I call a low-carbon bridge or a low-carbon future. You know, I'm a realist. I realize we're not going to switch off carbon fuels overnight. It's going to take many, many decades to get this right. But we have a fantastic opportunity by going through this system of 1 to 4 steps in energy hierarchy. And it just so happens that if you superimpose a payback on the graph, you'll find that without a doubt, by and large, number 1 and number 2 always pay back faster than anything else. And this can be borne out by the fact that a lot of people who are fitting renewables are relying on state subsidy, or subsidy by us as the bill payer to from the carbon taxpayer in terms of promoting renewables. Obviously, it's got to start somewhere, and I find myself in a really difficult position because I very much see myself as a green, sustainable engineer. So I would positively encourage, and I've had an interest since my student days, going all the way back to the 70s, in renewables, something I've always had a real personal interest in. So I find myself in a really tricky position because I'm dissuading people from fitting renewables and saying, no, reduce the energy in the design in the first place and fit more efficient and more coordinated, integrated controls. And you can also superimpose, as you see on the bottom of the graph here, the environmental benefits. The far more environmental benefits, ultimately, as well as financial, in investing in good controls and good commissioning and good maintenance systems. So that, to me, is a fundamental way that we should be approaching this. I go into this in a lot more detail in my book, and something that some of you may have heard me talk about before, but it's something to me that is absolutely vital, really, really important. Now, you could say that something we learn from history is history repeats itself. Existing systems in buildings, let's have a look at what the situation is. Now, we have a situation of an enormous opportunity to look at how we invest in low carbon and renewable systems. And when you look at the list of what's available, it's truly fantastic and exciting, because that's something as an engineer and something that we look at, we enjoy doing. But I have a fundamental question, and something I'm seeing in reality in all the commissioning I've done over the years and all the training, is a big fundamental question, which is, are these new systems integrated with each other, and are they being integrated into existing building systems? And I would say, by and large, no. And I think that's a big worry, and something I'd be really interested to hear about in the Q&A session, about how people are seeing their own experiences, whether or not they think I'm right on this, and what they feel of how these things are going to develop. Now, it's quite interesting because there's a company called Gartner, which some of you have heard about, and they look at how technology develops. And they came up with a theory, a practice, some years ago called a technology hype curve. And they look to see how technologies are going to be developed and how they're going to evolve over time. And so I decided to superimpose this method and look at, for example, photovoltaic panels, which have grabbed an enormous share of the headlines and seem to be sort of quite dominant, because you're seeing them spring up certainly across the whole of Europe. There's been an amazing deployment. I mean, in my area of rural Suffolk, where I live, there are fields, farmers' fields, thousands of acres full of photovoltaic cells, and I'm starting to get quite dismissive of this, because it's holding up prime agricultural land which should be used for growing food, and these sort of PV panels should be on roofs. That is dead space, not being chucked in farmers' fields, and it's a massive state subsidy. So I think governments and policymakers have got this very, very wrong. So if we look at a hype curve, we start off with a technology trigger, and we reach what's known as the peak of inflated expectations. And this is where I believe we're at in this process for low carbon renewables, because we've got the same problem with heat pumps. I've been commissioned several times to do studies on how effective heat pumps are being deployed, and unfortunately, because they haven't been commissioned properly or specified properly, we end up having to firefight a situation because they've been poorly specified or poorly commissioned, and it's giving the industry a bad name. So what we get from this, and I think we went through this with the feed-in tariff, and then I know that the feed-in tariff is an idea that came from the UK originally, but it's sort of spread out across the world, and I'm starting to see this repeated internationally. And what we get to the stage now is, I think we're at past this point now into what's known as the trough of disillusionment, where people have suddenly dawned on them that, wait a minute, this isn't such a fantastic technology, and the payback isn't as good as some of the other things we've been talking about. Then we get to a stage where we're probably at now on what we call the period of realization, where it is dawning on people, well, wait a minute, what else can we do? And then you get to this plateau of productivity where everything starts to pan out and an industry starts to establish itself. So I decided to think, well, wait a minute, let's try and superimpose this same methodology for energy efficiency, commissioning, controls, and maintenance, or what I call EECM. And where are we on that technology curve? Well, we've never had that same type of hype. What we've had is it's always been there, but it's never had a high profile. So you could superimpose that sort of green line as being a sort of a pretty steady growth in maintenance, but not really promoted effectively. And I would argue that as an industry, we need to push that profile up here and keep it there, which we can do via the various methods I sort of outlined. And I just think as an industry, we've got to change and do something fundamentally different to try and promote these basic, really important issues. So 2050 is often mentioned in terms of sustainability and targets that we've got to do in terms of stabilizing our CO2 emissions and our greenhouse gases. And when you look across the world, you look at what existing building stock we've got in the built environment, so much of the focus is on new builds. And when you look around the world, I've had some great times visiting some amazing buildings. And here are some examples. Just to give a little plug here is a fantastic building that I visited when I did some training in Mauritius, and hello to my friends from Mauritius who I know have logged on. Some amazing buildings, but they're quite limited in terms of how much scope and aspect there are. When you actually look at what the real situation is, it's all retrofit. And you could say that 90% of the buildings that will be there in 2050 have already been built. So we need to prioritize the upgrading and the retrofit and getting the maintenance regimes right, getting the commissioning right, and getting upgrading controls and moving towards the things that Steve was talking about EN 15232, and promote this as much as possible to try and raise our standards and to close that performance gap. And we've got a hell of a task here when you think about it, because if you actually look at that existing building stock, and this could be around the world, we've got old buildings, some very inefficient office blocks, industrial units, some of the older stock, especially in Europe. We've got tenements and basically terraced housing that goes back to Victorian times, which was not designed with modern energy efficiency in mind. So the task and the sheer scale of what we've got to do is immense, but a fantastic opportunity for our industry if we get it right. So in sort of closing, I'd like us to concentrate on what I call key areas for delivering and operating a low carbon energy efficient building. And I've sort of come up with this idea of the 6 C's. And the 6 C's involve all the things that we would see as being absolutely vital, but again, don't promote as well as we should. And we can start off with commissioning. Everybody knows that if you commission your building services absolutely spot on right from the start, you set everything up to work, as well as possible from the beginning. And the key to that as an ongoing process is to what we call continually commission, so that you go back and you look at the schedules and you make sure that everything is working to peak performance. So that includes all of the M&E, all of the mechanical electrical services that we deal with, all of the control regimes, everything that we do. And controls are absolutely fundamental to this, and that's something that we need to promote even more. Communication. I've talked about communication. I'm doing some communication now. I'm hoping that I'm making you think more about how we look at these issues and how important they are, and how we can utilize our knowledge and try and develop this in a much more constructive way. Competence. Competence is absolutely vital. Our industry is full of fantastic training, competent people that are all around the world. You know, I've come across some absolutely fantastic engineers in my time, and we don't promote ourselves as much as we should. We should be right up there, along with a whole bunch of other professions, because people don't understand what we do and how important we are. And compliance. Compliance is really important. All that legislation that keeps getting floated about by governments who don't seem to take it seriously and don't enforce it properly. As an industry, we should be promoting that competence, that compliance, and making sure everything comes together. And this gives me an opportunity to promote something that BNES are doing, called SFG20, Service and Facilities Group, of part of BNES, have developed a standard for a maintenance specification. And my colleague Tony Luck is with us, and hopefully he'll be able to say something more about this later. But it's an excellent standard and something that I think will go towards producing the competence and the sort of good communication and promoting the sort of things I've been talking about in this presentation. Finally, a shameless plug. If you want to read more about my philosophy, as you could call it, you can follow that Google link to, hopefully getting a copy of Delivering Sustainable Buildings, which I wrote about a couple of years ago. Very much an industry insider's view, covering everything I've been talking about and a lot more. I'm passionate about this, and I think that we have such a fantastic opportunity, and the more we can promote the industry and the more we can get this sort of raised up the agenda, the better. So my final slide is very much a motto that I picked up from an old polymath. I consider myself a bit of a polymath. I'll dabble with anything, but it's a good one. In the realm of ideas, everything depends on enthusiasm, but in the real world, all rests on perseverance, and that's what we've got to do. We've got to persevere in everything we do. So I hope that's been interesting and useful, and I'm be delighted to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. That was very, very good. Very good. And that's one word I've always used with you, Mike, is enthusiasm, because you've got that in spades. So thank you very much, Mike. I was going to introduce our third member of our panel tonight, who is Tony Luck, but Mike did that for me. So Tony is here representing SFG20, which is a fantastic tool which has been developed over many years by BNES to deal with some of the maintenance issues that Mike was talking about. It's actually getting much more sophisticated, as Tony, as it goes along, and it's a very dynamic online mechanism. So that might be some food for thought for questions. I was just in touch with Tim, the chairman, to see what questions were coming in from our worldwide audience, and last time I checked, he didn't have any. So, but I know they're out there and they're very interested, and Tim will come on the microphone in a sec.
Well, I have got one. I've actually got one.
Okay. You have got a question, Tim. That's
yeah.
I was just going to say, I was just putting in context. Yesterday there was a very high-profile event at the House of Lords, which is hosted by the CIBSE patrons, and at that we had the president of REBA, the president of CIBSE, and the president of BNES all talking together about collaboration. So. And they were talking very much at that high level about how the institutions should lead this and the trade associations should work together better. But I think what we've been talking about tonight is some of the nuts and bolts, which really is what makes it happen. You guys are out there kind of doing this stuff and working together and linking things together. So opportunity for questions to all our panelists. We've still got Mike online. We've got Tony Luck here in the front row. Steve's in the front row. If anybody in the room wants to ask a question, you will have to come up here and speak into this microphone. Otherwise, nobody will hear you. But Tim, I think you have a question from from the World Wide Web.
I have, yeah, I have, Ewan. Hope you can hear me. We've got a question here. We've got a question here from Morris, and Morris asks, he's asking Mike, actually. I'll paraphrase it. All the exciting things you're talking about, Mike, is a whole problem that energy is just too cheap.
Yeah, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. Without a doubt, energy is far too cheap. Not if, of course, if you're in fuel poverty or fuel poor, but in overall, in the scheme of things, it's far too cheap, and it's been held down artificially. If the true price of energy was factored in relation to its environmental impact and all the things we've been talking about, it would certainly make a massive difference. And it's easy for politicians to come up with gimmicks about holding prices and subsidizing different things. You know, they need to be a lot more ambitious and a lot bolder in what's going on. And you know, for example, the nuclear industry has been massively subsidized by the state for many years, and it really annoys me because you know, if it was on a true level playing field and we didn't have these artificial contracts for difference and all the rest of it, it would fail, and we would be looking at a lot more efficient ways of doing things. And if only we had the subsidy that all the renewables have put into subsidizing energy efficiency and control systems. That's the way it should be. People should be given an incentive to fit and upgrade control systems, you know, get a certificate for commissioning their buildings. I actually fundamentally believe that there should be a building MOT every year, and based on a building's efficiency. It could be based on an energy performance certificate or a display energy certificate. And all we've had with the current government in the UK is talking about watering it down and cutting out what the Prime Minister called the green crap. You know, to me, they just haven't got a clue. Sorry for being on my political soapbox, but it's something that I feel quite passionate about, as you can probably tell.
Obviously a good question there. I'll pass across to Ewan now for a question from London.
Any questions from the room? In which case I'd like to put one to Steve, if I may, Steve. The presidents yesterday were talking about how the different trade bodies can work together. I mean, we've got an example tonight. How do you see the BCIA and other organisations collaborating, sort of in practical terms? What should we be doing?
Well, I think we're doing everything right now. The BNES is a great opportunity for us controls guys. You know, we have access to all the individual trade bodies within BNES, and it's been a great platform for us to communicate our ideas, and the collaboration has been both ways, basically. More and more main plant equipment is arriving with controls already fitted. That for us poses some integration issues which we have to understand and adapt to, but equally there's a learning curve for the main plant and equipment suppliers to fit the correct controls. If we look ahead maybe 10 or 15 years, I could probably imagine that controls installers no longer exist. In fact, everything will come with a microprocessor on it and an IP address, and what are now controls engineers will become controls integrators. That's the way I see things going, and the only way that can be achieved is by better collaboration. And what we're doing right now with the groups within the BNAS and CIBSE is set us on the right way. Thank you.
Ewan, I've got a question here, just come in from Kate, and she asks, what is it gives an opportunity for a bit of a plug, I guess, but hopefully we're able to keep it brief. What is SFG20 that was mentioned earlier?
Oh, there you go.
Okay, perfect. SFG20.
This is Tony Luck, by the way, everybody.
Yeah, okay, so only on the weekend. SFG20 is a dynamic web service. It's written and owned by the BNES. Okay, and what we do is we provide specifications for the building services sector. Okay, a technical committee, write the schedules. We've got over 400 at the minute, 66 equipment tractors. And so what people do, they subscribe to the service, they understand what assets are in the building, search for them through the web service, and they pull the information out. And what the schedules provide there, they'll tell you the frequencies of the visits that you need to do. There's colour coding in there, so we'll highlight what bits are statutory. Function critical elements as well are highlighted yellow, so they're written in the ream that, you know, it's optimum maintenance. So again, focusing on energy as well, so you're getting the best out of your assets. You know, you're prolonging the life of those as well, and that's what we do. Within that as well, the system's constantly updated. So the technical committee that manage the content within the web service, they constantly monitor the industry, and as and when legislation changes best practice, the information is automatically updated. So subscribers to the system, you know, can rest assured that the information they're getting is the most current and up to date. So again, you know, the big thing for us is keeping it maintained and compliant. With SFG 20, the information you got will give you the tool to ultimately do that. Originally, back in 1990, when we first launched, it was a paper document. And I'm sure probably if I had an honest show of hands, everybody's got a dodgy copy of SFG 20 knocking around. Obviously, we've moved the times. Now on the web service, we can keep the stuff up to date in real time. Another function of the website is that you're able to customize as well. So again, you know, you can take our core schedules, open them up for full editing, and then you can customize them to suit the building needs. You know, so again, you might, for whatever reason, want to enhance frequencies, tweak it, play tunes on it. You know, you're able to take it, model it against your buildings. Again, maximum efficiency, etc. And again, you know,
Tony, sorry.
System. If you run CAFM type software, yeah.
Oh, we got a bit of delay there. Sorry about that. I was trying to cut in. I was trying to cut in. Okay. I was trying to cut in subtly, but I wonder if I'm sure you could speak on SFG for some time, SFG 20 for some time. But I'm just conscious we got a couple more questions have come in across the world, and it
okay. Okay, no, thank you.
Is that okay if we take those? I'm sorry to be so rude there, Tony, but people can go to the BNEF website.
You're breaking up a bit, Tim. Everybody around the world can hear you, but we can't hear Kim.
Okay.
So, do you want to try again, Tim?
Yep. Here we go. Here's a question. Is the FM industry...
Try again, please.
Is the FM industry too interested in soft FM?
That might be one for Jeff Prudence, I would think, would it not?
You ain't got long enough.
we have the chairman of the CIBSE FM Group in the room. Jeff, this is your big... You could close the meeting with this. Jeff is coming to the microphone. Is the FM industry too interested in soft FM?
I could also answer this one, Ewan, as well.
Well, you first, Mike.
The audience tonight, I say strategic FM, corporate FM, real estate. I slightly disagree with some of Mike's comments, and I'm sure he's going to come back to me on that. A lot of stuff's already out there. Don't complain about it. CIBSE, building services, engineering, controls, our opportunity, our times now. And if you wait to be asked, I think the only difference is the soft services, people are going forward and grabbing it. If we don't do that with the engineering stuff, then we're going to be complaining about it in 10 years. I think we've got the really opportunity to really, I think not just CIBSE, we are forcing the opportunity now. I was at something last night where people said, oh, the poor old maintenance engineers. They're not poor old maintenance engineers now. We have the opportunity, we're out there, people realising it's not short-term cost cutting, it's overall life cycle costing. We're the people who can give them that professional advice and guidance to influence the financial guys. So no, it's not just about the soft services side.
Okay, thanks,
Mike,
Jeff.
Mike, did you have a point on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what... Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
I agree to some extent with Jeff on this, but my experience tells a different story. As you know, a lot of you know, I've spent many years delivering training across the board, not just for engineers, but for FMs. And my experience with the soft side of FM is there's a massive gap, and we need to be talking to. I mean, I'm a great collaborator. I'm a great believer in working with as many institutions and as many professions as possible. So the more we can talk to RICS and the BIFM and every single professional body we can talk to, and the more we learn from each other about what our respective roles are. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, I have a good idea what building surveyors do, but you know, there's plenty of things that I can learn from them and vice versa. And when it comes to FMs, my experience is that they're incredibly good at doing sort of basic administration and running buildings and, you know, getting the cleaners to come in at the right time, whatever else, but they have not got a clue when it comes to building services engineering, and they're making some terrible decisions based on some very poor advice. And it's for us to grab that opportunity, and I do agree with Jeff on this, is to hammer it home really hard about how we need to promote good quality commissioning, continuous commissioning, maintenance regimes. And the more we can do that with a sort of multi working and collaboration, the better.
I think that's a great point. Can I cut in there, you, and just to give a bit of a shameless plug also for, as BNES has done one. There's a great guide, Guide M, and I know some of the authors. CIBSE Guide M is really worth a look. And
Mr.
I know there's several of the authors in the audience. So if you're a CIBSE member, you can get it for nothing, obviously, but it's worth having a look at CIBSE Guide M, which will help you on really pinning down the maintenance needs of building service engineering.
Yeah,
and there was a result of collaboration, was it not?
Because I was on the review panel for it. So, and I have to say, compared to the previous edition, the elements that incorporate sustainability and in-systems integration, everything else, it's a fantastic document and something that we should again be promoting actively through CIBSE membership and everything. Yeah, definitely.
And it is SFG 20 has a strong reference within Guide M.
Yeah.
So it's a good system of collaboration. Also, RICS, I understand, are represented in the room, and they were involved with this guide as well. Gentleman at the back with a question.
I'm going to, with the EU backs.
Okay, we're getting a question about EU backs here in London. Steve, you can answer and summarise if you like.
No, it's purely a methodology for enforcing the standard EN 15232, which is specifically for building controls. Nothing more. So it can't replace anything. Your question about what you get a very nice gentleman who will visit you on site and make a 1 or 2 day assessment of your plant. He will make recommendations. He won't make changes, but he will return some key performance indicators to you, which would be logged and stored at UBAC in Brussels. And then if you wish to continue with the UBAC assessment, the previous assessment can be compared with the latest assessment, and recommendations for improvement can be made from them. But it's a proper health check. It's almost like Mike mentioned, a building MOT.
Does that cost?
It would cost you, yeah. No. Well, I tell a lie. It depends who made the assessment. If you're an independent consultant on behalf of UBAC with no means for costing that, then no. But the way I see it, a lot of the lead assessors within UBAC are coming from companies who are systems integrators. So they have an invested interest in promoting the system and promoting an enhanced offer. So possibly yes, but every individual is different. So I couldn't answer that hand on heart.
Those assessors not pushing their own business?
Yes, they would be pushing their own business.
Could you repeat the questions?
No.
We can't hear them on the web.
Sorry, what was the question? I wasn't paying attention.
The question was what do you get from a UBAC assessment? And then that was an additional question on top of that was, would the assessor be biased towards offering their own services? And my answer to that was yes, he would want to offer his own services, but remember he's comparing against an independent assessment which is approved by an international standard. So he's not comparing it against a Siemens, against a Sauter or a Johnson's. He's comparing it against something which has been independently approved.
Okay, we have another question back here.
Why are we trying to basically put more layers on top of a complex system we already have when someone in the ESOL side of things can already do all of this?
The question is about, is there a plethora of assessments already out there, therefore why do we need another one?
Yeah, I mean, I asked the same question. Is it just another energy performance certificate? It is, but it's specific to controls, and better controls mean better buildings. It's as easy as that.
I mean, my take on this is that we have a ridiculous number of different schemes and standards, and that we need to have more integration, and it needs to be communicated a lot better in terms of people understanding it. So you'd think, wow, fantastic! The system of A to G is a great system because, you know, A is good, G is bad, and therefore you'd think that that could be promoted in more detail. Because people can have an instant snapshot. I mean, just look at the success of the EU directive on all the consumer goods, on washing machines, cookers, all that type of stuff. You know, you don't get anything below a D anymore. If you go down any of the stores and you try and find anything below an A+, an A++, a plus, it gets ridiculous. But it's been incredibly successful. And one of the things that I concentrate a fair bit, back to plugging my book again, I'm afraid, is that we need to have some form of national standard that's policed and perhaps enforced independently, where people can have a level playing field, so they can judge any energy efficient claims, any claims that are made on products, so they don't make bad decisions. They actually are badged and say, you know, can't. So that's the sort of thing we need.
Thanks, Mike. I've just had the nod from out there on the World Wide Web that we need to wind up.